I hate my real dad. A rich boy confesses to his single dad teacher. But what begins as a shocking cry for help spirals into hidden truths, heartbreaking secrets, and an impossible choice between two fathers. So when love, pride, and family collide, who will truly win his heart? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Through the window of the detention room, late afternoon sunlight painted long shadows across empty desks. Ethan slouched in his chair, arms crossed, his designer uniform jacket wrinkled from a day of restless fidgeting. The clock on the wall ticked away with maddening slowness, each second feeling like an eternity. Mr. Carter sat at his desk, grading papers with careful attention. Every so often, he'd glance up at his sole detention student, his expression neither angry nor judgmental, just patient and observant. Ethan's outburst in class earlier had been spectacular. When another student had mentioned the upcoming father-son camping trip, Ethan had snapped, "At least your dad shows up to these things." The entire class had gone silent. Mr. Carter had no choice but to assign detention, though his eyes had shown more concern than disappointment. Now, sitting in the quiet classroom, Ethan's anger had cooled into a familiar hollow ache. He pulled out his phone, checking it for what felt like the 100th time. No messages, no missed calls. Not that he expected any. His father was probably still in Hong Kong or Singapore or wherever this week's business deals had taken him. "You know the rules about phones during detention, Ethan, mister?" Carter said quietly, looking up from his grading. Ethan shoved the phone back into his pocket. "Sorry," he muttered, not meeting his teacher's eyes. Force of habit. Waiting to hear from someone? The question was gentle, lacking the usual authoritative tone teachers used. Something in Mr. Carter's voice made Ethan's carefully constructed walls waver. "No one important," Ethan replied, trying to sound casual. "Just checking the time." Mr. Carter set down his red pen and leaned back in his chair. "There's a perfectly good clock on the wall." "Yeah, well, maybe I don't like looking at school property. Everything in this place is so." Ethan gestured vaguely at the room, searching for words. "Institutional?" Mr. Carter offered. "Fake," Ethan finished. "Everything's just for show. The fancy buildings, the brass nameplates, the prestigious whatever. It's all just." He trailed off, realizing he was saying too much. The silence stretched between them. Outside, a group of students laughed as they headed to their cars, their day finally over. Ethan watched them through the window, noting how some of their parents waited in the parking lot, ready to pick them up. His own driver wouldn't arrive for another hour, carefully timed to avoid any interaction with other parents or students. "You know," Mr. Carter said, breaking the silence, "sometimes the things we're angriest about aren't the things we yell about in class." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm not angry." "No?" "No, I just—" Ethan shifted in his seat, the expensive leather of his shoes squeaking against the floor. "I just think it's stupid how everyone here pretends everything's perfect all the time." Mr. Carter nodded thoughtfully. "Perfect can be pretty exhausting to maintain." Something about those words hit too close to home. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He thought about his father's mansion, spotless, enormous, and empty. About the maids who straightened his room but never spoke to him. About dinner plates served precisely at 6, even though no one was there to eat them. "You don't know what it's like," Ethan said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Everyone thinks because your dad's some big shot, everything must be great. Like money fixes everything." "Does it not?" Mr. Carter asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Ethan laughed bitterly. "Yeah, sure. It fixes everything except—" He stopped, pressing his lips together. "Except what?" "Except making him actually care," the words burst out before Ethan could stop them. "Except making him show up to anything. Except making him remember I exist when he's not lecturing me about grades or proper behavior or the family name." His voice echoed in the empty classroom. Ethan's face burned with embarrassment, but now that he'd started, the words wouldn't stop. "You know what he sent me for my birthday last week? His assistant. His assistant came to my room with a card he didn't even sign himself, and a check. A check. Like I need more money." Ethan's hands were shaking now. "I haven't seen him in person for 3 months. But hey, At least I can buy whatever I want, right? Mr. Carter remained silent, his face showing only genuine concern and attention. It was that look, so different from his father's perpetual disappointment, that finally broke something in Ethan. "The funny thing is," Ethan continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "I used to think maybe if I got perfect grades, or won enough awards, or did everything right, maybe then he'd actually want to be around. Pretty stupid, huh?" "That's not stupid at all," Mr. Carter said softly. "It's human to want your parents' attention and love." "Love?" Ethan's laugh was harsh. "Yeah, right. Love is for people who can't afford better things, that's what he always says." He swallowed hard, fighting against the burning in his eyes. "You know what? I don't even care anymore. He can stay gone. He can send all the checks he wants. I don't need him." The clock continued its relentless ticking. Outside, the parking lot had emptied, leaving only long shadows stretching across the pavement. Ethan stared at his hands, horrified at how much he'd revealed, but unable to take it back. The pressure in his chest built until he couldn't contain it anymore. Looking up at Mr. Carter, seeing nothing but compassion in his teacher's eyes, Ethan finally spoke the words he'd never dared say aloud. "I hate my real dad." The confession hung in the air between them, and Mr. Carter sat in stunned silence, his grading forgotten on his desk. The words hung heavy in the air between them. "I hate my real dad." Ethan's face flushed red as soon as he said it, shocked by his own outburst. He waited for the usual lecture about respecting parents or being grateful for what he had. Instead, Mr. Carter set down his red grading pen and folded his hands on the desk. "That sounds like it comes from a place of real hurt," Carter said quietly. His voice carried no judgment, just gentle understanding that made Ethan's throat tight. Ethan stared at his expensive shoes, scuffed from kicking walls. "You don't know anything about it," he muttered, but his voice lacked its usual edge. "You're right. I don't know your exact situation," Carter agreed. He stood up and pulled a chair closer to Ethan's desk, sitting down at eye level. "But I do know what it's like when life isn't what you expected it to be." Something in his teacher's tone made Ethan look up. Carter's eyes held a familiar sadness that caught him off guard. "5 years ago, my wife Sarah passed away," Carter said softly. "Cancer. My daughter Lily was only 7 at the time." He smiled, but it was tinged with old pain. "Sometimes life hands you things you're not prepared for." Ethan's defensive posture softened slightly. I didn't know that." "Most people don't. We keep going, try to make the best of things." Carter ran a hand through his slightly graying hair. "It's just Lily and me now. Our house feels too quiet sometimes, but we manage. We have dinner together every night, talk about our days. She's learning to bake. Made her first cake all by herself last week. Turned out lopsided, but it was the best cake I've ever tasted." The pride in Carter's voice when he spoke about his daughter made Ethan's chest ache. "My dad's never even been to one of my basketball games," he found himself saying. "He sends his assistant to parent-teacher conferences. I don't think he knows what grade I'm in." "That must be really hard," Carter said simply. The genuine sympathy in those words cracked something in Ethan. "He's always working, or traveling, or in meetings." The words tumbled out faster now. "The house is huge, but it's just me and the staff most of the time. Mom's always at charity events. When Dad is home, all he talks about is how I need to get better grades, how I'm not living up to the family name." Ethan's voice cracked. "I can't remember the last time he even looked at me during dinner." Carter listened quietly, letting Ethan's words fill the space between them. When Ethan finally fell silent, Carter reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a packet of tissues, sliding them across the desk without comment. Ethan hadn't even realized he was crying until he saw the tissues. He quickly wiped his eyes, embarrassed. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Don't apologize for having feelings," Carter said firmly. "That takes courage, being honest about how you feel." "Yeah, well, feelings don't matter much at my house," Ethan said bitterly. "Just grades and appearances and which Ivy League school I'll attend." "Feelings always matter," Carter countered gently. "They're what make us human. When Sarah died, I tried to be strong for Lily, hide how much I was hurting. But one night, she found me crying in the kitchen at 2 a.m. Instead of being scared, you know what she did? She made me hot chocolate. Well, tried to. Spilled powder everywhere. He chuckled at the memory. But sitting there with my crying daughter, drinking lumpy hot chocolate in the middle of the night, that's when I realized we'd be okay. Because we weren't pretending anymore. We were just being honest about our pain. Ethan absorbed this, turning the tissue in his hands. How do you and Lily do it? Just the two of you? One day at a time, Carter answered. We have our routines, homework at the kitchen table, Sunday morning pancakes, movie nights with popcorn. It's not always easy. Bills are tight sometimes, and there are days I wish Sarah was here to help make decisions. But we've learned that family isn't about having everything perfect. It's about being there for each other, even when things are messy. The detention room had grown darker, sunset painting the walls in warm orange. Ethan looked at his teacher with new eyes. Here was someone who actually knew what it meant to lose something, to hurt. But instead of becoming bitter, he'd built something real and warm with his daughter. I shouldn't have said I hate him, Ethan said finally, his voice small. I wish things were different. It's okay to wish for that, Carter said. And it's okay to be angry sometimes. But don't let that anger become who you are. You're more than that. The clock chimed 4:30. Detention was over. Ethan stood up slowly, gathering his expensive backpack. For the first time, he felt oddly reluctant to leave the usually dreaded detention room. Thank you, Mr. Carter, he said quietly. For, listening, Carter smiled warmly. Anytime, Ethan. I mean that. Ethan nodded, adjusting his backpack strap. His steps were lighter as he walked to the door, as if some of the weight he'd been carrying had lifted. The familiar ache was still there, but something else had taken root alongside it. A small spark of understanding that maybe he wasn't as alone as he'd thought. The polished floors of Riverside Academy's main hall gleamed under bright fluorescent lights as parents in designer clothes filtered through the doors. The annual open house had transformed the usually quiet building into a buzz of activity, with proud mothers and fathers admiring their children's artwork on the walls and science projects displayed on long tables. Ethan slouched in his chair near the back of Mr. Carter's classroom, his blazer wrinkled and his tie loosened. All around him, other students sat with their parents, pointing out their achievements and sharing quiet laughs. The empty chairs beside him felt like spotlights drawing attention to his solitude. Mr. Carter moved through the room with easy grace, greeting each family warmly. His worn brown shoes and modest suit stood out among the expensive outfits of the other parents, but his genuine smile made everyone feel welcome. When he passed Ethan's desk, he paused. Your art project got a lot of attention earlier, Carter said, nodding toward a detailed charcoal drawing pinned to the wall. The way you captured the emotion in those eyes, that's real talent, Ethan. Ethan's cheeks warmed at the praise, but he just shrugged. Whatever, it's just a drawing. Carter's kind eyes studied him for a moment. Your parents running late? Mom said she'd try to make it. Ethan picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. Dad's in Singapore, or Hong Kong, or somewhere. Business stuff. Before Carter could respond, a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. Ethan's mother burst in, her high heels clicking against the floor. Her designer dress was perfectly pressed, but her face was pinched with stress and irritation. Sorry I'm late, she announced to no one in particular. Traffic was absolutely horrible, and my assistant messed up my entire schedule today. She dropped her leather handbag on Ethan's desk with a thud. Mrs. Richardson. Carter greeted her warmly. We're so glad you could make it. Has he been behaving? She cut in, her sharp gaze falling on her son. I got an email about detention last week. Really, Ethan, it's embarrassing. Your father worked so hard to pay for this school, and this is how you repay him? Ethan's face burned as nearby parents turned to look. He could see the pity in their eyes, mixed with that knowing judgment he'd grown to hate. Poor rich kid with his absent father and stressed-out mother. What did he have to complain about? Actually, Carter interjected gently, Ethan's shown remarkable improvement lately. His last essay was exceptional, and his art? His mother's laugh was brittle. He needs to focus on business and economics if he's going to take over his father's company someday. Drawing won't get him into Harvard. Ethan's hands clenched into fists under his desk. The familiar pressure built in his chest, that mixture of shame and anger and hurt that always came when his mother talked about his future like it was already set in stone. "I don't want to take over Dad's company," he muttered. "Don't be ridiculous," his mother snapped. "Of course you do. It's what we've been preparing you for your entire life. My father doesn't care what I want." Ethan's voice rose, drawing more stares. "He doesn't even know me." "Neither of you do." "Ethan," his mother hissed. "Lower your voice. You're making a scene." "Mrs. Richardson," Carter said softly, "maybe we could step outside and—" "No." Ethan stood up so quickly his chair scraped across the floor. "I'm sick of pretending everything's fine. I'm sick of trying to be perfect for people who are never there." Tears burned in his eyes, but he was too far gone to care now. "The only person who actually listens to me, who sees me as more than just some heir to a fortune, is Mr. Carter." The room had gone completely silent. Even the usual whispers had died away as everyone watched the scene unfold. Ethan's mother's face had gone white with anger and embarrassment. "That's enough," she said through clenched teeth. "We're leaving. Now." "No." Ethan's voice cracked with emotion. He turned to Carter, who stood watching with concern in his eyes. Months of buried feelings burst out of him like a breaking dam. "I wish you were my dad." The words echoed in the stunned silence. His mother's sharp intake of breath seemed to fill the room. Ethan stood trembling, tears now flowing freely down his face, as the weight of what he'd just said settled over everyone present. The other parents and students stared, frozen in place. Some looked away awkwardly, while others watched with undisguised fascination. Mr. Carter's face showed a complex mix of emotions: surprise, compassion, and something deeper that Ethan couldn't quite read. His mother's fingers dug into his arm. "We're leaving," she repeated, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. Right now. Ethan yanked his arm away, but the fight had drained out of him. His outburst left him feeling hollow and exposed. Without another word, he grabbed his backpack and rushed past the staring faces, out into the empty hallway where his footsteps echoed against the walls like accusations. The silence that followed Ethan's outburst lasted only seconds before whispers filled the classroom like rustling leaves. Parents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, some covering their mouths with manicured hands, while students leaned close to exchange hurried comments behind cupped palms. Mr. Carter stood frozen at the front of the room, his chalk-dusted hands gripping the edge of his desk. The raw pain in Ethan's voice still echoed in his ears. Across the room, Ethan's mother, Mrs. Henderson, straightened her designer blazer with trembling fingers, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Ethan James Henderson," she hissed, grabbing his arm. "We're leaving. Now." Ethan yanked away from her grip, his eyes wild and red. "Don't touch me." His voice cracked as he shouldered past her and bolted from the classroom. The hallway erupted with activity as he passed. Teachers poked their heads out of neighboring classrooms, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. A group of freshman girls, huddled by their lockers, phones already out, typing frantically. "Did you hear what the rich kid said? Poor Mr. Carter. His mom looks so mad." The whispers followed Ethan as he ran, his footsteps echoing against the lockers until he disappeared around a corner. Mrs. Henderson's heels clicked sharply against the floor as she stormed after him, but she stopped at the classroom door. Her perfectly made-up face twisted as she turned to Carter. "This is your fault," she said, voice trembling. "You've turned my son against his family." Carter shook his head, keeping his voice low and steady. "Mrs. Henderson, I assure you, save it." She spun on her heel and marched away, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the weight of dozens of staring eyes. Principal Matthews appeared in the doorway, his bow tie slightly askew. "Mr. Carter, perhaps we should continue the open house presentations in room 204. He clapped his hands, addressing the stunned parents and students. "If everyone would please follow me." The room slowly emptied, leaving behind half-drunk paper cups of coffee and scattered handouts about the semester's curriculum. Carter sank into his chair, running a hand through his graying hair. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the sudden quiet. Miss Rosa, one of the school's cleaning staff, slipped into the room with her cart. Her dark eyes were kind as she began gathering the abandoned cups. "Don't worry too much, Mr. Carter," she said softly, her accent gentle. "That boy, he needs someone to see him, really see him." Carter managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Rosa." He started collecting the handouts, trying to keep his hands busy to quiet his racing thoughts. The open house continued in other classrooms, but Carter stayed behind, straightening desks and erasing the board with mechanical movements. As evening settled over the school, parents and students gradually filtered out into the parking lot. The hallways grew quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of vacuum cleaners. Carter sat at his desk, a stack of essays before him, but the words blurred together. Red pen marks dotted the margins without really saying anything. The image of Ethan's face, raw with emotion, kept floating before his eyes. A small hand tugged at his sleeve, startling him from his thoughts. He looked down to find Maria, Rosa's 6-year-old daughter, standing beside his chair. Her dark curls were tied back with rainbow ribbons, and her eyes were big and serious in her round face. "Mr. Carter?" she whispered, glancing toward the door where Rosa was finishing her cleaning. "Can I tell you something?" He set down his red pen and turned to face her fully. "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" Maria leaned closer, her small fingers still clutching his sleeve. Her next words came out in a rush of warm breath against his ear. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The red pen rolled off Carter's desk and clattered to the floor. The sound echoed in the empty classroom like a gunshot. In the doorway, Rosa's vacuum cleaner fell silent. Carter stared at his bedroom ceiling, the moonlight casting shadows through the thin curtains. His digital clock blinked 2:17 a.m., but sleep felt impossible. The little girl's words from earlier kept echoing in his mind. "Mommy says you're my daddy." He turned to his side, the springs of his old mattress creaking. Through the wall, he could hear Lily's soft breathing from her room, his precious daughter. The one constant in his life since losing Sarah. But now, those whispered words had shaken his world. 15 years ago, that's when it happened. He'd been young, foolish, and grieving the loss of his own father. The memories flooded back with painful clarity. Maria, the kind-hearted maid at the Maxwell estate, had found him crying in the garden during one of his tutoring sessions. She'd offered comfort, understanding, and for one night, more than that. Carter pressed his palms against his eyes. "Oh God," he whispered into the darkness. "How did I not know?" He remembered Maria leaving her job shortly after, but he'd been too caught up in his own life to question why. He'd met Sarah a few months later, fallen in love, started building the life he'd always dreamed of. But now, like a stone dropped in still water, the ripples of his past were disturbing his present. Unable to lie still any longer, Carter got up. His bare feet padded quietly across the worn carpet as he made his way to the kitchen. The house was small, modest, but filled with love and memories. Photos lined the hallway wall. Lily's first day of school, her ballet recital, the three of them at the beach before Sarah got sick. In the kitchen, he filled a glass with water, his hand trembling slightly. The refrigerator hummed softly, and magnetic letters spelled out, "I love you, Dad," in Lily's crooked handwriting. The sight made his chest tighten. "What would you tell me to do, Sarah?" he whispered, looking at a small photo of his late wife that sat on the windowsill. Her smile, forever frozen in time, offered no answers. Carter sank into a kitchen chair, the wood warm from the heating vent below. His mind wandered to the little girl, Maria's daughter. He'd seen her around school, of course. She was in the 3rd grade, quiet and sweet, like her mother. How had he never noticed the shape of her eyes, so similar to his own? The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders. He was barely making ends meet as it was, supporting Lily on a teacher's salary. The house needed repairs, the car was ancient, and some months he had to choose between fixing the leaky roof or buying new shoes for Lily's growing feet. But it wasn't about money. It was about doing what was right. The very things he taught his students every day, integrity, responsibility, compassion, were now testing him in ways he never expected. His thoughts drifted to Ethan, another child carrying heavy burdens. The boy's cry for a different father had touched something deep in Carter's heart. Now, learning about his own child, the irony wasn't lost on him. Here was Ethan, longing for a father figure, while Carter's own flesh and blood had been right under his nose for years. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking time as Carter wrestled with his conscience. Through the window, he could see the first hints of dawn touching the sky. Soon, Lily would wake up for school. She'd bounce into the kitchen with her usual energy, asking for pancakes or telling him about her dreams. What would this mean for her? How would she react to learning she had a sister? Lily had always wanted siblings, but this wasn't the way anyone would choose to discover one. Carter got up and moved to the living room, settling into his old armchair. The family Bible sat on the side table where he and Lily read together some evenings. He picked it up, letting it fall open randomly, seeking guidance or comfort or both. His eyes fell on a passage about forgiveness and redemption. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. He thought about Maria raising their child alone all these years. Had she wanted to tell him? Had she been afraid? The questions multiplied like stars in the night sky, countless and out of reach. The sound of Lily stirring in her room brought Carter back to the present. He quickly wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. Through all this turmoil, one thing remained clear. His daughter needed him to be strong, to be present, to be the father she deserved. He stood up, his joints stiff from sitting so long. The morning routine waited. Breakfast to make, lunches to pack, a class full of students who needed his guidance, including Ethan, whose pain now seemed to mirror his own in unexpected ways. Walking back to his room to get dressed for the day, Carter paused at Lily's door. She was still sleeping, her stuffed giraffe clutched tight, dark hair spread across her pillow just like Sarah's used to. Love squeezed his heart, pure and fierce. "One day at a time," he whispered to himself, an old mantra from when Sarah first got sick. It had carried him through the darkest days of grief, and it would have to carry him through this, too. Back in his room, Carter pulled on his worn dress shirt and khakis, teaching clothes, dad clothes. His tie was slightly frayed at the edges, but it would do. The morning sun was starting to stream through his window now, painting the room in soft gold light. He thought about all the lessons he'd taught over the years, about character and choices, how facing our mistakes makes us stronger, how love means sacrifice sometimes, how family isn't always simple, but it's always worth fighting for. The mirror showed him a man marked by worry lines, but still standing, still trying, still believing in the power of love and second chances, even when life complicated everything. His alarm clock finally buzzed. Time to wake Lily, start breakfast, face another day. But as Carter reached to turn it off, his hand hesitated. The weight of truth sat heavy in his chest, a constant reminder of the past catching up with the present. The autumn breeze rustled through the modest neighborhood as Ethan stood on Mr. Carter's front porch, his hand hovering over the doorbell. His leather backpack felt heavy with textbooks he didn't really need help with. The excuse of tutoring was just that, an excuse. The door swung open before he could ring, and 12-year-old Lily beamed at him. "I saw you from the window! Come in! Come in!" She grabbed his wrist, pulling him inside with the enthusiasm only a preteen could muster. "Dad's grading papers, but he said we could start without him." The small house was nothing like his mansion, but warmth radiated from every corner. Family photos lined the walls, showing Lily growing up, and even some of Mrs. Carter before she passed. A worn but comfortable couch held carefully arranged throw pillows, and the smell of something sweet wafted from the kitchen. "I got everything ready," Lily announced proudly, leading him to the kitchen where ingredients were spread across the counter. Flour, sugar, butter, and chocolate chips waited in neat little groups. "Dad says I'm the cookie expert of the house," Mr. Carter's voice carried from his study. "That's because you're the only one who can make them without burning them." Lily giggled, and Ethan felt his shoulders relax. Here, laughter didn't echo off cold marble floors or get swallowed by empty rooms. Okay, first thing, Lily instructed, hands on her hips. Wash your hands. Then we measure the flour. She handed him a measuring cup, and Ethan stared at it like it was from another planet. I've never actually baked anything before, he admitted quietly. Never? Lily's eyes widened. But what about birthday cakes and Christmas cookies? Ethan shrugged, trying to keep his voice casual. We have a chef for that stuff. Well, today you're the chef, Lily declared, refusing to let his mood dim. And chefs wear aprons. She tossed him a faded blue apron with little white clouds on it. As Ethan tied it around his waist, Mr. Carter appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with an amused smile. Looking good, Ethan. Though I think that's my apron from 3 years ago. Dad, he's never baked cookies before, Lily announced, as if this was a tragedy that needed immediate attention. Then he's in good hands, Carter said warmly. Just try not to use all the chocolate chips for sampling before they make it into the dough. Lily's guilty expression made both Carter and Ethan laugh. The sound of his own laughter surprised Ethan. It felt real, not like the polite chuckles he gave at his father's business dinners. Under Lily's patient guidance, Ethan measured flour, cracked eggs, only getting a few shells in the bowl, and learned the difference between softened and melted butter. When he spilled some vanilla extract, nobody yelled. Lily just grabbed a paper towel and helped him clean it up, telling him about the time she dropped an entire carton of eggs. The kitchen smelled like breakfast for days, Carter added, now sitting at the small kitchen table with his grating spread out before him. He wasn't really focusing on the papers, though. Ethan could feel his watchful, caring presence. As they worked, Lily chatted about school, her art projects, and the family of birds nesting outside her window. She didn't expect Ethan to carry the conversation, but somehow he found himself sharing, too, about the books he liked to read, the guitar he'd always wanted to learn but his father thought was a waste of time, the way he sometimes went up to the roof of his house just to look at the stars. When the first batch came out of the oven, golden brown, and filling the kitchen with an incredible aroma, Ethan felt a strange pride he'd never experienced before. These weren't perfect, professional cookies like the ones at home. Some were a little lopsided, and they hadn't all spread the same way, but he'd made them. The best part, Lily announced, pulling out 3 glasses and the milk carton, is eating them while they're still warm. They sat around the small kitchen table, Carter pushing aside his grating to make room. The cookies were gooey, the chocolate chips still melted, and Ethan couldn't remember the last time food had tasted this good. So, Carter said casually, dunking his cookie in milk. How are things at home, Ethan? The question was gentle, without pressure, but Ethan felt his throat tighten. He focused on breaking his cookie into smaller pieces. Fine, the same. Dad's busy with some big merger. Mom's planning another charity gala. He tried to keep his voice neutral, but the words felt hollow. Lily, sensing the shift in mood, pushed the plate closer to him. Have another cookie. They're better when you eat them in pairs. Ethan smiled gratefully at her, but his heart was already growing heavy with the knowledge that this moment couldn't last forever. Through the kitchen window, he could see the sky turning purple with approaching evening. I should probably head back, he said reluctantly, though every part of him wanted to stay. Thank you for teaching me about cookies. You can come back tomorrow, Lily suggested brightly. I can show you how to make brownies. Or maybe pizza from scratch. Carter stood, gathering some of the cooled cookies into a paper bag. Take these with you. And Ethan? He placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. You're welcome here any time. For tutoring, baking, or just because. The weight of those words made Ethan's eyes sting. He nodded quickly, afraid to speak, and carefully folded the top of the cookie bag. As he gathered his backpack and headed for the door, the warmth of the kitchen seemed to cling to him like a shield against the cooling evening air. At the end of the driveway, Ethan paused, looking back at the modest house with its warm windows and the shadows of the Carter family moving inside. His own home waited ahead, a magnificent prison of marble and silence. His fingers tightened around the paper bag of homemade cookies as he whispered into the gathering dusk. I don't want to go back there. The Saturday evening sky painted soft orange streaks across the clouds as Ethan shuffled his feet on Carter's front porch. His stomach churned with nervousness as he held up a wrinkled permission slip that didn't really need signing. It was a weak excuse, but it was all he could think of. The porch light flickered on, casting a warm glow over the worn welcome mat. Through the window, Ethan could hear the clatter of pots and pans, and his nose caught the aroma of something homemade wafting through the screen door. It smelled nothing like the fancy meals his family chef prepared. This was simpler, more inviting. Carter opened the door, still wearing his reading glasses, and a faded blue apron with tiny paint stains. "Ethan?" His eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. "What brings you by?" Ethan thrust the permission slip forward. "Need this signed, for Monday." His cheeks flushed at how transparent his excuse must seem. Carter's gentle smile showed he saw right through it. But he didn't call Ethan out. Instead, he stepped aside. Perfect timing. "Lily and I were just about to have dinner. There's plenty to go around." Inside, the small house felt alive with the kind of comfort Ethan's mansion never had. Lily stood at the stove, carefully stirring a pot of vegetable soup while humming a tune. Her dark curls were tied back with a polka-dot ribbon that matched her father's apron. "Look who's joining us," Carter announced, and Lily's face lit up. "Ethan, did you come to taste my soup? Dad taught me how to make it." She gestured proudly at the pot with her wooden spoon. The kitchen was tiny compared to what Ethan was used to. Instead of marble countertops and stainless steel appliances, there were worn wooden cabinets and a small four-burner stove. Yet somehow, it felt more like a kitchen should feel. "Here," Carter handed him a stack of bowls. "Would you mind setting the table?" Ethan found himself nodding eagerly, pleased to be given a task. In his own home, servants did everything. Here, he watched Carter slice a fresh loaf of bread, while Lily carefully ladled soup into the bowls he'd arranged. The dining table was really more of a breakfast nook, tucked into a corner by a window with cheerful yellow curtains. 3 mismatched chairs squeezed around it, and Ethan noticed how one chair had a slightly wobbly leg stabilized by a folded paper napkin. "Sorry it's nothing fancy," Carter said as they sat down. "Just soup and bread tonight." "Are you kidding?" Ethan dipped his spoon into the steaming bowl. "This looks amazing." And he meant it. The soup was simple: carrots, celery, potato chunks, and tender bits of chicken swimming in a clear broth. But the smell made his mouth water. Before they ate, Carter bowed his head. "Lily, would you like to say grace?" Ethan watched, fascinated, as Lily folded her hands and closed her eyes. "Dear God, thank you for this food, and for bringing Ethan to share it with us. Please bless this meal and help us remember those who don't have enough to eat. Amen." "Amen," Carter echoed softly, and Ethan found himself whispering it too, though he'd never said grace before. The soup was nothing like the sophisticated dishes he was used to, but every spoonful tasted of care and attention. Lily had added just the right amount of pepper, and the vegetables were perfectly tender. The bread was still warm, and Carter passed around a small crock of butter that had been allowed to soften on the counter. "So how's that history project coming along?" Carter asked, tearing off a piece of bread. Good." Ethan stirred his soup. "I decided to focus on local architecture in the 1900s. There's this really cool building downtown that used to be a hotel." As he talked, Ethan realized neither Carter nor Lily were checking their phones or looking distracted. They asked questions, nodded along, and seemed genuinely interested. When Lily shared a funny story about her science experiment gone wrong, everyone laughed, not the polite chuckles Ethan was used to at his family's formal dinners, but real, wholehearted laughter. The conversation flowed easily, jumping from school to books to Lily's upcoming dance recital. When Ethan's bowl was empty, Carter offered seconds without hesitation, even though Ethan could tell the pot wasn't exactly overflowing. "May I?" Ethan asked, standing up with his bowl. In his own kitchen he'd never served himself, but here it felt natural to walk to the stove and carefully ladle another helping. As the evening progressed, the kitchen grew dim, except for the soft glow above the stove. Nobody rushed to turn on more lights. Nobody checked the time. The conversation continued to meander comfortably, punctuated by the clink of spoons and the peaceful sound of crickets through the open window. Ethan felt something unfamiliar expanding in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the soup. Here, in this small kitchen with its chipped tiles and cramped table, he felt more at home than he ever had in his father's mansion. Here, nobody expected him to be perfect. Nobody checked their watch or mentioned appointments or investments or grades. He watched as Carter absently tucked a stray curl behind Lily's ear while she told another story. The simple gesture made Ethan's throat tight. When was the last time anyone had touched him with such casual affection? The soup bowls were empty now, but nobody moved to clear them away. The moment felt too perfect to disturb. Ethan sat back in his wobbly chair, watching the last rays of sunset paint the kitchen walls golden, wishing with all his heart that this simple, beautiful evening would never end. The kitchen was warm and cozy, filled with the lingering scent of homemade soup and fresh bread. Carter stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up as he washed dishes, while Ethan dried them with a checkered dishcloth. The routine felt oddly comforting, so different from his life at the mansion where servants handled everything. "You don't have to help," Carter said, passing him another bowl. "You're our guest." "I want to." Ethan carefully wiped the bowl dry. "At home, I'm not allowed in the kitchen. Dad says it's—" He paused, his voice growing quiet. "Beneath our status." Carter glanced at him, noting how Ethan's shoulders had tensed. In the living room they could hear Lily humming as she worked on her homework. "Must be a big kitchen," Carter said gently, keeping his tone casual. "Yeah, it's huge." Ethan set the bowl down with more force than necessary. "Everything's huge. The house, the gardens, my room." His voice cracked slightly. "But somehow, I feel like I can't breathe in there." Carter turned off the water, giving Ethan his full attention. The boy's hands were gripping the counter's edge, his knuckles white. "Sometimes," Ethan continued, his words tumbling out, "I sit at our dining table. It's this massive thing, could seat 20 people easily. And Dad's at one end, buried in his phone, and I'm at the other end, and it's just—" He swallowed hard. Silent. Always silent. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as Carter waited, letting Ethan find his words. "You know what's funny?" Ethan's laugh was hollow. "We have 4 living rooms. 4, but we never actually live in any of them. Everything's just for show. Perfect furniture that no one sits on. Perfect paintings that no one looks at. Perfect sun who's supposed to be." His voice wavered. "Supposed to be what?" Carter asked softly. "The heir." Ethan spat the word like it tasted bitter. "That's all I am to him. The heir to the company, the fortune, the legacy." He grabbed another plate, wiping it roughly. "Did you know he has my whole life planned out? Private school, Harvard Business School, then straight into the company. He's already got me scheduled for board meetings next summer. I'm 15. The plate trembled in Ethan's hands. Carter gently took it from him before it could fall. "Yesterday," Ethan continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "I got an A+ on my history paper. I was so excited to show him. But when I went to his study," he blinked rapidly. "He was on a video call. Held up his hand without even looking at me. Just said, 'Not now, Ethan. I'm discussing the merger.'" The boy's breath hitched. "It's always not now, unless it's about the company or my grades or how I'm representing the family name. Then suddenly he has all the time in the world to tell me how I'm not meeting expectations." Carter watched as Ethan tried to compose himself, recognizing the familiar struggle of a child desperate to be seen. "You know what's worst?" Ethan's voice was thick with unshed tears. "The house is so big that sometimes I can go whole days without seeing anyone except the staff. And they're paid to be there, so." He shrugged, but the casualness couldn't mask the pain. "Sometimes I wonder if I disappeared, how long it would take for him to notice." "Ethan." Carter's heart ached for the boy. "I have everything," Ethan's voice cracked completely now. "Everything money can buy. But I'd trade it all just to have." He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The longing for a real father's love was written all over his face. A tear escaped, rolling down Ethan's cheek. He quickly wiped it away, embarrassed. "Sorry, I don't know why I'm telling you all this. It's stupid." Carter dried his hands and turned to face Ethan fully. The boy looked so young and vulnerable in that moment, trying so hard to hold himself together. "It's not stupid," Carter said firmly. "Not at all. Ethan's voice was barely audible. "I'm so tired of feeling invisible." Carter placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder, feeling the slight tremor running through the boy's frame. "You're not invisible here." The simple words seemed to break something in Ethan. His shoulders began to shake as more tears fell, years of pent-up loneliness finally finding release in Carter's small, warm kitchen. The morning sun crept through heavy curtains in Ethan's room, casting long shadows across his king-sized bed. He pulled the covers over his head, trying to hide from the day ahead. Most 15-year-olds couldn't wait for their birthday, but Ethan's stomach churned at the thought of another formal celebration where he'd have to pretend to be the perfect son. A sharp knock echoed through his room. "Young man, your father expects you downstairs in 15 minutes. Their housekeeper's voice was crisp and formal, just like everything else in this mansion. Ethan dragged himself out of bed, running his fingers through his dark hair. His reflection in the oversized mirror showed a boy in expensive silk pajamas who looked more tired than excited. He changed quickly into the outfit that had been laid out for him. Pressed khakis and a blue button-down shirt that probably cost more than Mr. Carter's entire wardrobe. The marble stairs felt cold under his feet as he descended to the main floor. His father stood in the study, impeccably dressed in a business suit, despite it being Saturday morning. A small wrapped box sat on his massive mahogany desk. "Ethan," his father said without looking up from his phone, "I trust you slept well." "Yes, sir." The words came automatically, rehearsed from years of similar exchanges. His father finally looked up, his steel-gray eyes examining Ethan like a business proposal. 15 is an important age. You're becoming a young man, and with that comes increased responsibility. He pushed the box across the desk. "Happy birthday, son." Ethan's fingers trembled slightly as he unwrapped the expensive paper. Inside was a sleek watch with a black leather band, a Rolex, of course. Nothing but the best for the Hamilton heir. "This watch belonged to my father," his father continued, his voice maintaining its businesslike tone. "He gave it to me on my 15th birthday, and now I'm passing it to you. It's worth more than most people make in a year, so I expect you to take proper care of it." "Thank you, sir." Ethan slipped the watch onto his wrist. It felt heavy, like a handcuff. "The car will take you to your birthday lunch at the club at noon. I have meetings until then, but I'll join you there." His father was already looking back at his phone. "Don't be late." Ethan nodded and left the study, his new watch ticking away the seconds until another awkward meal where he'd have to make small talk with his father's business associates while pretending this was how he wanted to spend his birthday. The morning dragged by slowly. Ethan sat in the mansion's library, staring out the window at the perfectly manicured gardens. He thought about Lily and how she'd shown him how to make chocolate chip cookies last week, flour dusting her nose as she laughed. He thought about Mr. Carter's warm smile and how he actually listened when Ethan talked. The birthday lunch was exactly as he'd expected, stuffy and formal. His father's business partners congratulated him with rehearsed smiles while discussing stock portfolios over overpriced steaks. Ethan picked at his food, nodding politely and wishing he was anywhere else. By late afternoon, he couldn't take it anymore. His father had already left for another meeting, leaving Ethan alone in the huge house. The new watch felt like it was burning his wrist. Without really planning it, he found himself walking toward the door. "I'm going for a walk," he told the housekeeper, who merely nodded. She was used to him disappearing for hours at a time. The evening air was cool and fresh as Ethan walked the familiar route to Mr. Carter's modest neighborhood. Street lamps were just starting to flicker on, casting warm pools of light on the sidewalk. His feet seemed to know the way on their own, carrying him past neat little houses with bikes in the driveways and wind chimes tinkling on porches. When he reached Mr. Carter's house, Ethan hesitated. The porch light was on, and through the window he could see movement in the kitchen. What was he doing here? They probably had their own plans for the evening. He shouldn't intrude. But before he could turn away, the front door opened. Lily stood there, her face lighting up with a huge smile. "I thought I saw someone out here." "Dad, he's here!" Mr. Carter appeared behind her, wearing an apron dusted with flour. Perfect timing. Come on in, Ethan. Confused but grateful, Ethan stepped inside. The house smelled amazing, like vanilla and chocolate, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Close your eyes," Lily commanded, practically bouncing with excitement. Ethan glanced at Mr. Carter, who nodded encouragingly. He closed his eyes, feeling Lily's small hand grab his and guide him forward. "Okay, open them." There, on the kitchen table, sat a homemade birthday cake. It wasn't perfectly frosted like the expensive one at the club had been. The chocolate frosting was a bit uneven, and the writing was slightly wobbly. But written in careful blue letters were the words, "Happy Birthday, Ethan." 15 candles flickered cheerfully, their warm light making the whole kitchen glow. "We weren't sure if you'd come," Lily explained, "but I told Dad we had to make it anyway, just in case. I did the frosting myself, and the cake is only slightly lopsided," Mr. Carter added with a warm chuckle. "Make a wish, Ethan." Ethan stared at the cake, his vision suddenly blurry. No one had ever made him a homemade cake before. No one had ever cared enough to try. The expensive watch on his wrist felt like it weighed a ton compared to this simple gift made with love. He tried to speak, but his throat felt too tight. Tears spilled down his cheeks, dropping onto the wooden table. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were something else entirely. His heart felt so full it might burst. "Oh no, did we do something wrong?" Lily asked, worriedly. Mr. Carter put a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes people cry when they're happy too." Ethan nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Through his tears, he could see the candles still flickering, waiting for his wish. He didn't need to think about what to wish for. He already had it right here in this warm kitchen with these people who had chosen to care about him. Taking a deep breath, Ethan leaned forward and blew out the candles. The autumn wind scattered golden leaves across the parking lot of Riverside Preparatory School as parents gathered in small clusters after drop-off. Mrs. Henderson, whose son shared math class with Ethan, leaned in close to 2 other mothers, her designer handbag clutched tight against her chest. "I saw him again yesterday," she whispered, glancing around. "That's the 3rd time this week Ethan's been at Mr. Carter's house. It's peculiar, don't you think?" Mrs. Blake nodded, adjusting her pearl necklace. "My daughter says he's there almost every afternoon now. Apparently, they bake cookies and have dinner together. Can you imagine? A boy from his background spending time in that tiny house?" "Well," Mrs. Thompson added, her voice dripping with concern, "I heard his mother complaining at the salon, says Ethan's been impossible at home lately, talking back, missing family dinners. She blames that teacher." The whispers spread like wildfire through the affluent community. At the country club, during tennis matches and over martini lunches, parents traded increasingly elaborate theories about why a wealthy teenager would choose to spend time in a teacher's modest home. Inside the school, Ethan remained oblivious to the growing storm. He sat in Carter's classroom during lunch, sharing sandwiches with Lily, who had started bringing extra food just for him. Carter watched them from his desk, grading papers but smiling at their easy laughter. "And then," Lily giggled, finishing a story about her science project, "the volcano actually worked. Dad had to clean purple foam off the ceiling." Ethan laughed, a genuine sound that made him look his age instead of the serious mask he usually wore. "That's nothing. Last week, I tried making pancakes by myself and—" A sharp knock interrupted them. Mrs. Rodriguez, the school secretary, stood in the doorway with a tight expression. "Mr. Carter, a word?" Carter stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. Through the window, Ethan could see the secretary's hands moving rapidly as she spoke, Carter's shoulders tensing with each word. When he returned, Carter's smile seemed forced. "Ethan, maybe we should stick to official tutoring hours for a while, just until things settle down." "What? Why?" Ethan's voice cracked, betraying his panic. "Did I do something wrong?" No, Carter assured him quickly. "It's just that some parents have expressed concerns about boundaries. They don't understand." Ethan's face darkened. "You mean they're gossiping? Like they always do." He stood up, hands clenched. I bet my father's friends started it. They can't stand that I'm happy somewhere else." "Ethan!" Carter reached out, but Ethan was already gathering his things. "It's fine," he said, though his trembling voice suggested otherwise. "I get it. Everyone thinks they know what's best for me." The next few days brought more whispers, more sideways glances. Parents requested parent-teacher conferences with unusual frequency, their questions thinly veiling their true concerns. Is it appropriate for a student to spend so much time with a teacher? Shouldn't there be more professional distance? Carter maintained his composure, explaining patiently about tutoring and mentorship, but he could feel the pressure building. Each morning brought more pointed emails from administration about maintaining appropriate boundaries. The situation reached its breaking point on a Wednesday afternoon. Carter was helping a student with algebra when the classroom door burst open. Ethan's father stood in the doorway, his expensive suit at odds with his reddened face and clenched fists. "Everyone out," he commanded, his voice cutting through the quiet classroom. Students scrambled to gather their things, shooting worried glances at their teacher. Carter remained calm, standing slowly. "Mr. Charleston, perhaps we should discuss this in the principal's office?" "Oh, we'll discuss it right here." Ethan's father strode forward, looming over Carter's desk. "What kind of game are you playing with my son?" "No game, sir. I'm simply doing my job as an educator and mentor." "Mentor?" Mr. Charleston spat the word like it tasted bitter. "I hear you're playing house with my son. Having him over for dinner, letting him bake cookies like some common—" He cut himself off, breathing hard. "Do you know what people are saying? Do you know how this looks?" Carter met his gaze steadily. "I know that Ethan is a bright, sensitive young man who—" "He is my son!" Mr. Charleston slammed his hand on the desk, making papers jump. "Mine, not yours. You're just a teacher. A teacher who seems to have forgotten his place." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Carter felt his heart race, but kept his voice level. "My place is to help my students, in whatever way they need. Your place," Mr. Charleston leaned in close, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "is about to be unemployment if you don't end this immediately. I made one call to the school board about your inappropriate relationship with a student, and they were very interested indeed." Carter's stomach dropped. He thought of Lily, of their mortgage, of the medical bills still piling up from his wife's final illness. "Stay away from my son," Mr. Charleston continued, straightening his tie. "No more tutoring. No more after-school visits. No more playing substitute father, or I promise you, you won't just lose this job, you'll never teach again." He turned on his heel, pausing at the door. "And if I hear that Ethan's been to your house again—" He left the threat hanging in the air like smoke. The door slammed behind him, leaving Carter alone in the suddenly too quiet classroom. Through the window, he could see Ethan standing in the parking lot, watching his father's expensive car peel away. Their eyes met briefly before Ethan turned away, shoulders hunched against the weight of his father's control. Carter sank into his chair, head in his hands, feeling the walls closing in around him. The happy afternoons of homework and cookies, of Lily teaching Ethan to make paper cranes, of quiet conversations about hopes and fears, all of it threatened to crumble under the power of money and influence. And somewhere in his heart he knew this was only the beginning of the storm. The classroom door burst open with a crack that made everyone jump. Ethan's father, Richard Montgomery, stood in the doorway like a thundercloud, in an expensive suit. His face was tight with anger, his normally perfect hair slightly disheveled. "Pack your things, Ethan. Now." His voice cut through the stunned silence of the math lesson. Ethan's pencil clattered to the floor. "What? Dad? I'm in the middle of—" "Now." Richard strode to Ethan's desk, grabbing his son's backpack and shoving books into it himself. The other students stared, frozen in place, as their classmate's face turned red with embarrassment. "Mr. Montgomery," the math teacher started, "perhaps we could discuss this after—" "There's nothing to discuss." Richard's words were clipped and final. "My son is being withdrawn from this institution, effective immediately." Ethan's hands trembled as he gathered his remaining belongings. His throat felt tight, and he couldn't look at his classmates. The whispers had already started, like insects buzzing in his ears. "Dad, please," Ethan whispered. "Can't this wait until car? Now." Richard gripped Ethan's arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to brook no argument. As they marched through the hallway, Ethan caught a glimpse of Mr. Carter emerging from his classroom, probably drawn by the commotion. Their eyes met for just a moment. Carter took a step forward, his face filled with concern, but Richard pulled Ethan around the corner before either could speak. The drive home was suffocating in its silence. Ethan stared out the window, watching his school, his friends, his teachers, Carter and Lily disappear behind them. His father's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "You're enrolled at Westbrook Academy," Richard finally said, his voice eerily calm. "It's a respected boarding school in Vermont. Your mother is packing your things now." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Vermont? But that's 4 hours away." "Yes." Richard didn't take his eyes off the road. "Far enough to end this inappropriate situation with that teacher." "It's not inappropriate," Ethan's voice cracked. "He actually cares about me. He listens. He is nothing." Richard's fist slammed against the steering wheel. "He is a public school teacher who couldn't even keep his own wife alive, living in a tiny house with his daughter, playing at being some sort of saint, and you—" He took a sharp breath. "You are my son, my heir. I will not have you throwing away everything I've built because some glorified babysitter made you feel special." Tears burned in Ethan's eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Not in front of his father, never in front of his father. At home, his mother was waiting with 3 packed suitcases. She wouldn't meet his eyes as she fussed with his collar and straightened his jacket. "It's for the best, darling," she murmured. "You'll see." The drive to Vermont was endless. Ethan watched the familiar cityscape fade into rolling countryside, each mile taking him further from the only real warmth he'd known. His phone had been confiscated. "You'll get it back once you're settled," his father had said, cutting off even the possibility of reaching out to Carter or Lily. Westbrook Academy rose from the Vermont hills like a fortress of red brick and ivy. Students in crisp uniforms moved between buildings, their faces blur of strangers. The headmaster greeted them with practiced warmth, leading them through marble hallways while spouting statistics about college acceptance rates and academic excellence. "Your roommate is at lacrosse practice," the housemaster explained, showing Ethan to a sterile dorm room with twin beds and matching desks. "Dinner is at 6 sharp, uniform tomorrow morning, schedules on your desk." Richard placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, the first touch since dragging him from class. "This is an opportunity, son. Make the most of it." His voice held no room for argument, no space for the pain that was choking his son. Then they were gone. Just like that. No real goodbye, no moment of hesitation. The door clicked shut, and Ethan was alone with his expensive suitcases in a room that felt like a prison cell. He sat heavily on the edge of his assigned bed, the springs creaking under him. The room smelled wrong, like industrial cleaner and unfamiliar laundry detergent. Not like Carter's house, with its scent of fresh-baked cookies and coffee and something indefinably homey. With shaking hands, Ethan unzipped the smallest suitcase. There, tucked between carefully folded sweaters, was Lily's birthday card. He'd hidden it in his desk drawer at home, but somehow his mother had found it and packed it. Maybe she did understand, just a little. The card was covered in Lily's careful drawings, stick figures of all of them around a birthday cake, complete with wobbly flames on the candles. She'd written, "Happy birthday, big brother," in purple marker, decorating each letter with stars. Ethan traced the words with his finger, remembering how she'd bounced with excitement as he opened it, how Carter had squeezed his shoulder with that warm, steady presence that made everything feel safe. The tears he'd been holding back since morning finally spilled over, dropping onto the handmade card. He was more alone now than he'd ever been in his empty mansion. At least there, he'd had the hope of sneaking away to Carter's house, of finding moments of belonging in that small, love-filled home. Here, surrounded by strangers' things in a strange place, that hope felt as distant as the family he'd started to believe could be his. The kitchen clock ticked softly in the darkness, its gentle rhythm marking time in the quiet house. Carter sat alone at his worn wooden table, his hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee he'd forgotten to drink. The dishes from dinner were still in the sink. He hadn't had the heart to wash them after Lily went to bed. His daughter had barely touched her food tonight. "Is Ethan really gone?" she'd asked, pushing peas around her plate. "Can't we do something, Dad?" Carter hadn't known what to say. How could he explain to a 12-year-old that sometimes adults made choices that hurt children, thinking they were doing the right thing? The moonlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. On the refrigerator, Lily's drawings hung like bright spots of hope, including one she'd made of herself, Carter and Ethan standing together. She'd drawn it just last week, when everything still felt possible. Carter's chest tightened as he remembered Ethan's face earlier that day, when his father had dragged him from the classroom. The boy's eyes had been wide with fear and betrayal, silently begging for help that Carter couldn't give. The memory of those eyes haunted him now. He rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on his shoulders. As a teacher, he was supposed to protect his students. As someone who had grown to care deeply for Ethan, he felt like he'd let him down in the worst possible way. The house creaked softly, and Carter glanced toward the stairs, making sure Lily was still asleep. Her quiet breathing drifted down from above, steady and peaceful. At least one child in his care was safe and secure tonight. But Ethan. Carter's mind wandered to the boarding school where the boy had been sent. Was he alone in a strange room right now? Was he scared? Angry? The thought of Ethan facing this upheaval without support made Carter's heart ache. He picked up his coffee cup and walked to the sink, pouring out the cold liquid. The simple action reminded him of all the times Ethan had helped with dishes after dinner, his initial awkwardness giving way to comfortable conversation and eventual laughter. Those moments had been precious, a glimpse of the person Ethan could become when given the chance to just be himself. Carter turned off the kitchen light and moved to the living room, where the old armchair waited like a faithful friend. This was where he often sat late at night, grading papers or reading. But tonight, the stack of ungraded tests on the coffee table seemed meaningless compared to the real-life lesson unfolding around him. The room still held traces of Ethan's presence. A textbook he'd left behind, a cushion still dented from where he'd last Saturday. Each item was a reminder of the void his absence had created. Not just in this house, but in their lives. Carter settled into the chair and closed his eyes. The words of his late wife came back to him, something she'd said during her final days. Love isn't about having the right answers. Sometimes it's just about being there in the questions. Right now, Carter had nothing but questions. How had things gone so wrong? Could he have handled it differently? Should he have seen this coming and protected Ethan somehow? A car passed outside, its headlights briefly illuminating the room. Carter watched the light move across the wall, thinking about how quickly things could change. One moment you're sharing a meal with someone, the next, they're gone. One day you're teaching math equations, the next you're watching a student being torn away from everything familiar. The weight of it all pressed Carter to his knees beside the chair. Prayer had always been his anchor, especially after losing his wife. Now, in the quiet darkness, he bowed his head and let his heart speak. "Lord," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "watch over that boy tonight. You know his heart. You see his pain." He paused, struggling to find the right words. I wanted to help him. I wanted to show him what real family feels like. But maybe that wasn't my role to play. Tears slipped down his cheeks as he continued. He needs more than just a teacher. He needs someone who can be there for him completely, without complications or consequences. Lord, if I can't be his father, please send someone who will love him as one. The prayer hung in the still air of the living room, a father's heart reaching out for a child who wasn't his own, but who had somehow become part of his soul. A soft creak on the stairs made Carter look up. Lily stood there in her pajamas, her face concerned in the dim light. "Dad," she whispered. "Are you okay?" Carter quickly wiped his eyes and opened his arms. Lily came to him, fitting perfectly in his embrace like she always had. They sat there together in the darkness, a father and daughter holding on to each other, both thinking of the boy who had briefly made their family feel even more complete. "I miss him too, Dad," Lily murmured into his shoulder. Carter held her tighter, grateful for the reminder that even in the midst of loss, love remained. He might not be able to help Ethan right now, but he could keep praying, keep hoping, and keep his heart open to whatever path God had in mind, for all of them. The night deepened around them, but in that moment of shared grief and love, Carter felt a flicker of peace. Sometimes the most powerful prayers were the simplest ones, spoken from a heart that truly cared. "Lord, if I can't be his father, please send someone who will love him as one." 3 weeks into boarding school, and Ethan couldn't take it anymore. The stone walls of Wellington Academy felt more like a prison than a school. His expensive uniform itched, a constant reminder of his father's control. Every morning, he stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the angry boy looking back at him. He'd gotten into his third fight yesterday. Some rich kid had made a comment about his poor teacher friend, and Ethan's fist had connected before he could think. Now his knuckles were bruised, and the headmaster had threatened to call his father. Again, Ethan lay on his narrow bed, fully dressed, waiting. His roommate's soft snores filled the darkness. The clock on his nightstand showed 2:17 a.m. Perfect. He reached under his bed and pulled out his backpack. He'd packed it days ago. Some clothes, the birthday card from Lily, and the little bit of cash he'd managed to save. His father's credit cards lay untouched on his desk. He wouldn't use anything that could be traced. The floor creaked as he stood. His roommate stirred but didn't wake. Ethan held his breath, counting to 10. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Moving like a shadow, he crept to the door. The old hinges protested softly as he eased it open. The hallway beyond was empty, lit only by emergency lights that cast a sickly green glow. His heart pounded so loud he was sure someone would hear it, but the dorm remained quiet except for distant snoring and the hum of the heating system. Getting out was easier than he'd expected. The security guard was dozing in his booth, and the back gate's lock had been broken for weeks. The school's pride in its historical architecture meant plenty of blind spots in the security cameras. The night air hit him like a splash of cold water. October had turned the world crisp and sharp. Leaves crunched under his feet as he hurried across the grounds, staying close to the shadows of buildings. Once he reached the road, Ethan started walking. The highway stretched ahead like a black ribbon under the stars. He pulled his jacket tighter and stuck out his thumb whenever headlights appeared. The first few cars zoomed past. An hour later, a tired-looking trucker finally stopped. "Where you headed, kid?" the man asked, peering at him suspiciously. "Just going home," Ethan said, trying to sound casual. "Visiting my dad." The trucker hesitated, then nodded toward the passenger seat. "I can take you as far as Millbrook." Ethan climbed in, his backpack clutched to his chest. The truck's cab smelled like coffee and cigarettes. As they rolled through the dark countryside, the trucker kept glancing at him, but didn't ask questions. 3 rides, and several hours later, the sun began to paint the sky pink. Ethan recognized the streets now. His legs ached from walking between rides, and exhaustion made the world feel fuzzy around the edges. Carter's neighborhood looked different in the early morning light. The modest houses seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the day to begin. A newspaper carrier tossed rolled papers onto driveways. Someone's sprinkler clicked on, misting the cool air. Ethan's feet felt like lead as he climbed the 3 steps to Carter's front porch. The familiar welcome mat, faded and fraying at the edges, made his throat tight. What if Carter turned him away? What if he'd ruined everything by coming here? His hand shook as he raised it to knock. The sound seemed too loud in the quiet dawn. Seconds stretched into forever. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He heard movement inside, footsteps approaching the door. His legs trembled with fatigue and fear. The porch light clicked on, and the door opened. Carter stood there in sweatpants and an old t-shirt, clearly just woken up. His eyes widened as he took in Ethan's appearance. The rumpled clothes, the dark circles under his eyes, the desperation written across his face. "Please," Ethan whispered, the word catching in his throat. "I didn't know where else to go." The sounds of early morning filled the silence between them. Birds greeting the sun. A distant car starting. The soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Ethan swayed slightly on his feet, ready to collapse from exhaustion and emotion. He waited for judgment, for rejection, for the lecture he probably deserved. But Carter just stood there, taking in every detail of his face, seeing past the dirt and fatigue to the pain underneath. Ethan's vision blurred with tears he couldn't hold back anymore. His legs felt like they might give out at any moment. The night's journey, the weeks of anger and loneliness, the weight of his father's disappointment, it all crashed down on him at once as he stood on that familiar porch, waiting for an answer. Dawn painted the sky behind him in shades of hope and fear, while he stood trembling at the threshold of the only place that had ever felt like home. Carter opened his front door to find Ethan shivering in the morning chill, his school uniform wrinkled and dirty. Dark circles shadowed the boy's eyes, and his usually neat hair was disheveled. Without hesitation, Carter pulled him inside. "I couldn't stay there anymore," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, don't send me back. Let's get you warmed up first." Carter guided him to the kitchen, his heart aching at how small and vulnerable Ethan looked. The morning sun was barely peeking through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. "Lily's still asleep," Carter said softly, pulling out a chair. "Sit down. When's the last time you ate?" Ethan shrugged, staring at his hands. "Yesterday morning, maybe? I don't remember." Carter moved efficiently around the kitchen, pulling eggs from the fridge and bread from the box. The familiar routine of cooking helped calm his racing thoughts. What was he going to do? He couldn't keep Ethan here. That would be kidnapping. But looking at the boy's haunted eyes, he couldn't bring himself to turn him away either. "Here." Carter set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of Ethan. "Eat slowly." Ethan picked up his fork with trembling fingers. After the first bite, he started wolfing down the food like he hadn't eaten in days. Carter watched him, noting the new bruises on his knuckles and the tear in his sleeve. "Want to tell me what happened?" Carter asked gently, sliding into the chair across from him. Ethan swallowed hard. "They talk about you at Wellington, call you names, say you're trying to steal rich kids' money or something stupid like that." His voice grew thick with emotion. "Yesterday this guy Thompson wouldn't shut up about it, so I shut him up myself." "With your fists?" Carter asked, though he already knew the answer. Ethan nodded, pushing his empty plate away. "The headmaster said he was calling my father. Again, I couldn't face him. Not after everything." His eyes welled up with tears. "I took the bus as far as I could, then walked the rest of the way here." "All night?" "Yeah." Ethan wiped his eyes roughly with his sleeve. "I know it was stupid, but this is the only place that feels like." He trailed off, unable to finish. "Like home?" Carter supplied quietly. Ethan's face crumpled. He nodded, and the tears he'd been holding back spilled over. Carter moved around the table and pulled the boy into a hug. Ethan clung to him, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I can't go back," Ethan choked out between breaths. "Not to Wellington, not to my father. Please, Mr. Carter, please don't make me go back." Carter held him tighter, feeling the desperate grip of Ethan's fingers on his shirt. He thought of his own daughter sleeping upstairs, how blessed he was to have her trust and love. Every child deserved that security, that sense of being truly wanted. "I hear you," Carter murmured. "I hear how much you're hurting." Footsteps creaked on the stairs, and Lily appeared in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She froze when she saw Ethan, then rushed forward to hug him too. "You came back," she exclaimed, then noticed his tears. "What's wrong, Dad? What happened?" Carter kept one hand on Ethan's shoulder as he explained simply, "Ethan needed a safe place this morning." Lily nodded with the pure acceptance of a child. "I'll make hot chocolate," she declared, moving to the kitchen with purpose. Ethan wiped his face, embarrassed, but grateful for the distraction. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," he mumbled. "Don't apologize for needing help," Carter said firmly. "But Ethan, we need to think this through. Your father must be worried sick." "He's not," Ethan said bitterly. "He's probably just mad I'm embarrassing him again." Carter sighed, choosing his words carefully. "Whether that's true or not, I can't legally keep you here without his knowledge. You know that, right?" Fresh panic flickered across Ethan's face. "You're going to call him?" "I have to," Carter said gently. But I'm not sending you back without trying to fix this. What if? He paused, weighing his next words. What if I ask him to meet with us? Face to face, just the three of us. We can talk about what's really going on. He won't listen, Ethan protested. He never listens. Maybe not before, Carter acknowledged. But sometimes it takes a crisis to open people's eyes. Will you trust me to try? Lily returned with 3 mugs of hot chocolate, setting them carefully on the table. The warm, sweet smell filled the kitchen, making everything feel a little less dire. Ethan wrapped his hands around his mug, staring into the swirling chocolate as if it held answers. Finally, he nodded. Okay, he whispered. But will you stay with me? When he comes? Of course, Carter promised. I'm not abandoning you, Ethan. We'll face this together. Carter reached for his phone, his heart heavy but determined. As he dialed the number he'd memorized from school records, he said a silent prayer for guidance. This conversation could change everything, for better or worse. Mr. Davidson, this is James Carter, Ethan's former teacher. Your son is safe. He's with me. He paused, listening to the explosion of anger on the other end. Sir, please, before you say anything else, I'd like to meet with you. In person. Just you, me, and Ethan. There are things we all need to discuss. The doorbell rang, its harsh buzz shattering the morning quiet. Ethan flinched, instinctively stepping behind Carter. Through the window, they could see the sleek black luxury car parked in front of Carter's modest home, looking as out of place as a peacock in a chicken coop. Lily, honey, Carter said calmly. Go upstairs to your room, please. Lily squeezed Ethan's hand before hurrying up the stairs. Carter straightened his shoulders and opened the door. Richard Montgomery, Ethan's father, stood on the worn welcome mat in an immaculate business suit that probably cost more than Carter's monthly salary. His face was flushed with anger, his carefully styled hair slightly disheveled, the only sign of his agitation. "Where is my son?" he demanded, pushing past Carter into the small living room. His eyes swept dismissively over the second-hand furniture and family photos before landing on Ethan. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The embarrassment you've caused?" Ethan pressed himself against the wall, his face pale. "Dad, Get in the car," Richard cut him off. "We'll discuss your punishment at home." Carter stepped between them. "Mr. Montgomery, please. Let's talk about this." "Talk?" Richard's laugh was bitter and sharp. "I thought I made myself clear last time, Mr. Carter. Stay away from my son. You're just a teacher who doesn't know his place." With all due respect, Carter's voice remained steady, though his heart hammered in his chest. "Your son ran away from school and came here for a reason. Don't you want to know why?" "I know why," Richard snapped. "Because you've filled his head with nonsense. Made him think he can disrespect his family, abandon his responsibilities." "Because I'm scared of you," Ethan shouted suddenly. His words echoed in the small room, making everyone freeze. "Because nothing I do is ever good enough. Because you don't even see me. You just see your heir, your legacy, your reputation." Richard's face darkened. "How dare you? Everything I've done has been for you. The best schools, the finest opportunities. But when was the last time you asked me how I felt?" Ethan's voice cracked. "When was the last time you came to any of my games? Or helped me with homework? Or just hugged me?" Carter watched pain flicker across Richard's face before it hardened again. "I'm not here to coddle you. I'm here to prepare you for the real world." "The real world needs love too, Mr. Montgomery," Carter said quietly. "Your son isn't just an investment. He's a person who needs his father's attention, guidance, and affection. And I suppose you think you can provide that better than me?" Richard's voice dripped with contempt. "A struggling single father who can barely make ends meet? Money isn't what makes a good father," Carter replied, his calm tone masking his anger. "Being there does. Listening does. Showing up for the small moments does. Like you showed up for your own child?" Richard's words landed like a slap. "Oh yes, I did my research after you started meddling with my son. I know about the maid's daughter. Your daughter. What makes you think you can lecture me about fatherhood when you abandoned your own child?" Carter felt the blood drain from his face. Behind him, he heard Ethan's sharp intake of breath. "You're right," Carter admitted after a moment, his voice rough with emotion. I made a terrible mistake years ago. I didn't know about her until recently, and that shame will haunt me forever. But at least I can admit my failures. Can you?" Richard's confident expression wavered. "Being a father isn't about money," Carter continued, standing his ground. "It's about love. It's about being brave enough to say, 'I'm sorry,' when we mess up. It's about putting our children's emotional needs before our own pride." Ethan moved out from behind Carter, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, please. I don't want your money or your legacy. I just want you to see me. Really see me." The room fell silent, except for Ethan's quiet sniffles. Richard stood frozen, staring at his son, as if seeing him for the first time. The carefully constructed mask of the successful businessman cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "Your son is an amazing young man," Carter said softly. "He's kind, intelligent, and despite everything, he still loves you. He's not running away from responsibility. He's running toward connection. The question is, are you brave enough to meet him there?" Richard's hands trembled slightly as he loosened his tie. For a moment, he looked lost, like a man who had suddenly discovered he'd been walking in the wrong direction his entire life. "Ethan," he said, his voice hoarse. The tension in Carter's small living room crackled like static before a storm. Richard Montgomery's expensive shoes creaked against the worn hardwood floor as he took another threatening step toward his son. A knock at the door made everyone freeze. Maria, the Montgomery family's maid, stood in the doorway, holding the hand of a small girl with dark curls. Her usually neat uniform was wrinkled, and her eyes were red-rimmed but determined. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, but I couldn't stay away. Not anymore." Ethan's eyes widened as his half-sister Sophie darted inside, her Mary Jane shoes clicking against the floor. "Daddy!" she called out, but stopped short when she saw all the angry faces. Richard's expression shifted from rage to confusion. "Maria, what are you doing here?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Montgomery." Maria's voice trembled but held firm. "But there are things you need to know. Things I should have said years ago." Carter's face had gone pale, his hands clenched at his sides. He looked at Sophie, who shared his warm brown eyes and gentle features, similarities he'd noticed, but had been afraid to acknowledge. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard demanded, looking between Maria and Carter. Sophie tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, you said Mr. Carter is my real daddy. Is that why we came?" The words hung in the air like suspended glass, ready to shatter. Ethan's mouth fell open as he stared at his little sister, then at Carter, seeing the resemblance for the first time. "It's true," Maria said quietly. "Mr. Carter is Sophie's father. It happened before I started working for you, Mr. Montgomery. Before you married Mrs. Montgomery." Richard's face reddened. "This is preposterous. You're telling me that this teacher—" He spat the word like it was dirty. "He's the father of my wife's maid's daughter?" "Yes," Carter spoke up, his voice steady despite his obvious distress. "I didn't know until recently. Maria and I. It was one night, many years ago. I was young, stupid, and running from my own pain. When she disappeared, I thought." He swallowed hard. "I should have looked for her. I should have known." Ethan stood frozen, processing this revelation. His teacher, the man who had shown him more fatherly love in a few months than his own father had in 15 years, was actually Sophie's father. The little sister who snuck him cookies from the kitchen, who drew him pictures when he was sad, shared the same blood as the man he'd grown to admire. "So this is why," Richard said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is why you've been trying to steal my son. To what? Complete your little collection of children?" "No," Carter protested. "I never knew about Sophie until she told me herself. And Ethan." His voice softened. "Ethan came to me because he needed someone to listen, to care." "I give him everything," Richard shouted, making Sophie jump and clutch her mother's hand tighter. "The best schools, the finest clothes, every advantage I never had growing up." "But you never give me you," Ethan burst out, finding his voice at last. "You're never there. When I got the lead in the school play, you sent your assistant. When I broke my arm last year, you were in Singapore. Sophie's mom makes my lunch every day, and Carter shows up. He listens. He cares about who I am, not just what I'll become." Maria stepped forward, her chin lifted. "Mr. Montgomery, I've worked for your family for 8 years. I've watched Ethan grow up. I've seen how lonely he is in that big house. You give him things, sir, but things aren't enough." Sophie, sensing the gravity of the moment, walked over to Carter and took his hand. The simple gesture spoke volumes, and Richard's eyes followed the movement, something shifting in his expression. "Even Sophie," Ethan continued, his voice cracking. "She didn't know Carter was her dad, but she loved coming to his house with me. Because here," he gestured around the modest living room with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in Lily's artwork. "Here feels like home." Richard Montgomery stood very still, his expensive suit suddenly seeming to weigh heavily on his shoulders. He looked at his son's face, streaked with tears, but strong. He looked at Maria, who had raised not only her own daughter but had mothered his son when his own wife was too busy with social obligations. He looked at Carter, who despite having so little in material wealth, had managed to give both children something he had failed to provide. The silence that fell was heavy with truth. Richard's carefully constructed world of wealth and control was crumbling, leaving him face to face with the consequences of his neglect. In that small living room, surrounded by evidence of real family bonds, his own failures as a father were impossible to ignore. Sophie looked up at all the adults, her small voice piercing the silence. "Are you mad that Mr. Carter is my daddy?" No one answered immediately. The question, innocent as it was, laid bare the complexity of their situation. Richard's face showed a mix of emotions: anger, shame, and something that might have been recognition. Carter's home, with its warmth and love, stood in stark contrast to the cold mansion where Ethan had grown up, where Sophie spent her days watching her mother work. Maria squeezed her daughter's shoulder, her eyes meeting Carter's across the room. There was pain there, but also relief, the relief of truth, finally spoken. Ethan remained close to Carter, his teenage defiance softened by the weight of the moment. The silence stretched on, filled with unspoken words and years of hidden truths. Richard Montgomery, a man accustomed to controlling every situation with money and power, found himself wordless in the face of such raw emotion and undeniable reality. The evidence of his son's suffering, coupled with the revelation about Sophie, had stripped away his armor of righteous anger, leaving him exposed to the simple truth: love couldn't be bought, and family meant more than blood or wealth. The clock on Carter's living room wall ticked past midnight. Empty coffee mugs littered the coffee table, testament to the hours of painful conversation that had unfolded. Richard Montgomery sat hunched forward in his armchair, his usually pristine suit jacket discarded, his tie loosened. The mask of the powerful businessman had crumbled, revealing something raw and human underneath. "I don't know how to fix this," Richard whispered, his voice hoarse. He looked at his son Ethan, who sat close to Carter on the worn couch. "I've been so focused on building an empire, I forgot what really mattered." Carter watched the man carefully. He'd seen this transformation before in troubled parents, the moment when pride finally gave way to truth. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, drumming against the windows. "When did I stop seeing you, son?" Richard's eyes glistened. "When did I start treating you like another investment instead of my boy?" Ethan's hands trembled in his lap. Carter placed a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling him lean into the touch. "I was 8, Ethan said quietly. "After Mom left. You stopped coming to my room to say goodnight. You stopped asking about my day. Everything became about grades and achievements and living up to the Montgomery name." Richard flinched as if struck. He pressed his palms against his eyes, shoulders shaking. I thought if I made you strong, independent, if I gave you everything money could buy, but I just wanted you, Dad," Ethan's voice cracked. "I wanted you to come to my soccer games, to eat dinner with me instead of working late, to be proud of me for who I am, not what I achieve." The rain grew heavier outside, matching the tears now flowing freely down Richard's face. He looked at Carter with desperate eyes. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you balance everything? I see how Ethan lights up around you. How do you give him what I couldn't?" Carter chose his words carefully. I'm not perfect, Mr. Montgomery. I make plenty of mistakes. But I learned something when I lost my wife. Time is precious. Every moment with our children is a gift we can never get back. He gestured around his modest living room. We don't have much here. Sometimes I worry about bills. But we have dinner together every night. We talk about our days. We pray together. When Lily's scared or sad or happy, she knows she can come to me. And you gave that to Ethan too, Richard said softly. Because every child deserves to be seen, Carter replied. To be heard. To know they matter not for what they do, but for who they are. Richard stood up suddenly, pacing the small room. His expensive shoes scuffed against the carpet as he moved. I don't know how to start over. I don't know how to be that kind of father. You start small, Carter said. You show up. You listen. You put down your phone during conversations. You ask questions and really hear the answers. Even if I'm not good at it at first, especially then, Carter smiled gently. Children are remarkably forgiving when they see genuine effort. Right, Ethan? Ethan nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. I just want a chance, Dad. A real chance. Richard crossed the room in 3 long strides, kneeling in front of his son. I want that too. I want to learn. I want to do better. He looked up at Carter. Will you? Will you help me? Help us? Carter felt the weight of the moment. Of course. But you have to be willing to be vulnerable. To admit when you're wrong. To put Ethan first. I will. Richard's voice was firm despite his tears. I promise. Ethan looked between the 2 men, his wealthy father on his knees, humbled and honest for the first time in years, and Carter, steady and strong in his quiet way. Something shifted in the boy's heart, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. He launched himself forward, wrapping one arm around his father's neck and the other around Carter's shoulders, pulling them both close. I don't care about money, Ethan whispered fiercely. I just want a family. Steam rose from mismatched plates of spaghetti and meatballs around Carter's dining table. The old wooden table, usually set for just 2, now struggled to accommodate 6 people. Their elbows bumped occasionally, creating awkward mumbled apologies. Richard Montgomery sat stiffly in his designer suit, looking somewhat out of place among the humble furnishings. He held his fork like it might break, carefully twirling pasta while stealing glances at his son Ethan. 3 weeks of counseling sessions had softened his sharp edges, but old habits died hard. Would you like more garlic bread, Mr. Montgomery? Lily offered the basket with a bright smile, her natural warmth cutting through the tension. Yes, thank you. Richard accepted a piece, his lips twitching into what might have been a smile. And please, call me Richard. Carter watched the exchange while helping his newly discovered daughter Maria with her napkin. The 7-year-old had marinara sauce on her chin, and he dabbed it away with practiced patience. She giggled, the sound pure and sweet. Daddy, you do it just like Mommy does, Maria said, making both Richard and Carter freeze for a moment. But instead of awkwardness, Carter just smiled and smoothed her hair. Well, your mommy taught me well these past few weeks, he said softly. Anna, Maria's mother and the former maid, had been understanding beyond measure as they worked out this new family dynamic. Ethan watched the interaction with quiet intensity. He sat between Carter and Lily, where he seemed most comfortable these days. His father had allowed him to return to school, and the afternoons were now split between both homes. Homework at Carter's kitchen table, weekend brunches at the mansion, and family counseling sessions that somehow managed to include everyone. The sauce is really good, Richard offered, clearly trying. Did you make it, Carter? Actually, Carter grinned. Ethan did. He's becoming quite the cook. Richard's eyebrows shot up as he looked at his son. You cook now? Ethan shrugged, but there was pride in his voice. Lily's been teaching me. We made the meatballs together. They're the best, Maria chimed in, sauce once again decorating her face. Better than the fancy chef at your house, Uncle Richard. A surprised laugh escaped Richard's throat, perhaps his first genuine one at this table. Is that so? Way better, Lily agreed, reaching for more garlic bread. Ethan's got talent. You should taste his chocolate chip cookies. I didn't know you were interested in cooking, Richard said softly to his son. There's a lot we're learning about each other, Ethan replied. And for once, there was no bitterness in his tone. Just simple truth. Carter watched the exchange while refilling water glasses. These dinners had become a weekly tradition, part of the healing process their counselor had suggested. The first one had been almost unbearably tense, with Richard checking his phone every 2 minutes and Ethan refusing to speak. But something had shifted over the weeks. Remember when we burned the first batch? Lily giggled, nudging Ethan with her elbow. Hey, that was your fault. You said to turn the oven up higher. Did not. Did too. Their playful bickering filled the small dining room, and Carter noticed Richard watching them with an expression of wonder. His son was laughing. Really laughing. Something that had become rare in their mansion over the years. Dad, Ethan suddenly turned to Richard. Maybe next week we could cook at home? I could show you how. Richard's face softened. I'd like that, son. Though I warn you, I've never cooked anything in my life. That's okay, Carter chimed in. Neither had Ethan until recently. Sometimes, the best things start from scratch. The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Maria reached over and took both Carter's and Richard's hands. Can we pray? Lily taught me how we always pray at dinner. Richard looked startled, but didn't pull away. Soon they were all holding hands around the table, heads bowed, as Lily led them in a simple grace. Carter felt Ethan's hand squeeze his slightly, and when he opened his eyes, he saw tears glistening in the boy's eyes. You okay? Carter whispered. Ethan looked around the table, at his father trying to help Maria cut her spaghetti, at Lily teaching Richard the proper way to twirl pasta on his fork, at this mismatched family that somehow fit together in all its imperfect glory. His smile was wobbly, but real. I don't hate my dad anymore, he whispered back, just loud enough for Carter to hear. Because, now, I have too. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.